Thank you, Katrina, and thank you everybody who is joining us this afternoon. I'm Berrick Abramson, one of the commissioners on the Colorado Commission for Higher Education. And with my colleague and friend, Commissioner Sarah Hughes, have the privilege of co-chairing the 1330 task force. As Katrina said, we're going to give everybody just another minute or two, but we know we've got a lot of people who are carving out time in the middle of their day, so we're going to try to get started as promptly as possible. So we will get going in just another minute, but really appreciate everybody making time for us for this call today. For those who have just joined in, again, my name is Berrick Abramson, and together with Sarah Hughes, we have the privilege of co-chairing the task force that you all have generously agreed to spend your time, the 1330 Task Force on Student Success and Workforce Revitalization. For those of you who are dialing in on the phone, we are going to be having a little Q&A session. For if you're on the Zoom application or on your desktop, you'll see down under the reactions in the lower right, you can raise your hand or lower your hand. If you're on the phone, you can use *6 to mute or unmute yourself and *9 to raise your hand. But it is 1:31, and out of respect for everybody's time, we are going to go ahead and get started. We have members of the task force as well as of each of the 3 working groups that we've formed joining for today's call, and are grateful for the time you're all committing today, but more importantly, the time and the expertise that you'll be bringing over these next few months to help us develop a series of recommendations around student success and workforce revitalization and the alignment of our higher ed system. We are going to hear first from the governor after we hear from Executive Director Paccione and Barella. We're going to have time for a little bit of a Q&A, and I know a lot of you who have just recently agreed to serve on these working groups probably have a lot of questions about process, about logistics, about meetings. And we'll get all of that covered, and we have an orientation coming up on September 2nd at 9 o'clock. You should have received the details, and in that there's a survey where you can also submit some questions. So we're hoping that time we have the governor and we have the directors on today, we can really focus our questions as well as our questions for Representative McCluskie, who's joining us, around the intent and the work that we're all setting out to do. But with that, I'm going to get us dive right into the start of this meeting and hand it over to Colorado Department of Higher Education Executive Director, Dr. Angie Paccione.
Thank you, Berrick, and it's great to be with you guys today. Sorry, it's a little bit shaky. I'm actually, some of you may know, but my mom had to be in the hospital last night and today, so I'm with my mom at the hospital. But I definitely wanted to join you because, of course, this is a very important kickoff, and it's exciting. I don't know, has the governor joined us yet, or is he on his way? He has joined us, Alana? Yeah. Oh, great. So I just wanted to say a few things, Gov. Everybody knows because of some of the great transformative work that we've already done, how passionate the governor is about K-12 education. But I know, and I hope you all will know and find out right away, how passionate he is also about higher education, about post-secondary education. Governor is passionate about making sure that students have access and that higher ed is affordable. He's passionate about making sure that students are prepared for the workforce and the workforce of the future. And he's also passionate that students experience success with college level courses while they are still in high school so that they can gain the confidence, gain the credit, and also gain the competence that's needed to really succeed. So there are many other things, but I'm hoping that you will learn when you hear from the governor now, you can learn and feel his passion around higher ed. We've got work to do. We're ready to do the work, but I'm excited to have a governor, of course, who supports us and is ready to come alongside as we need him to. And so I'm delighted, of course, to serve at the pleasure of the governor in this role. And it's truly a joy to be part of the cabinet and to work with all of us to make sure that Colorado leads the way in post-secondary education for all students. With that, I'll turn it over to my friend and governor, Jared Polis.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Dr. Paccione, Commissioner Hughes, Commissioner Abramson, and of course to all our commissioners and others that are joining this call. We are so grateful for your leadership and the impact that your work has on the lives of Colorado students and on really their whole successful career trajectory throughout their lives. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to address you about the ideas you're offering, the recommendations that you put forward, and really articulating some of our goals in higher ed. This task force is taking on really some of our state's most critical challenges, ensuring a post-secondary learning system that really meets the needs of Colorado's diverse students where they are, meets the needs of our workforce today and tomorrow. And when we get this right, our students, our economy, and our state as a whole will benefit and will thrive. With the expertise in this room, I'm confident that we can and we will get it right. You know, we find ourselves at a unique moment. Our state is emerging from an incredibly challenging time. We build back. We have the opportunity to evaluate whether systems that have long been in place through inertia are working optimally to serve the needs of today's and tomorrow's students, to serve the needs of our state, to serve the needs of today's and tomorrow's economy. We all know that Colorado is a great place to live. It's also a great place to learn, great place to work. But across our state, there's students and communities that struggle, whether it's a region that's facing challenges in reskilling and upskilling residents with high-skilled jobs for a changing workforce, transitioning from coal-dependent economies, students who face high loans, perhaps for degrees in areas that are mismatched with their own earning potential or careers. Employers, whether it's cybersecurity or healthcare or housing, who are unable to hire and find and train enough talent to grow as fast as the economic demand entails. Our goal is to really to implement our vision of a Colorado for all. That means where everyone can thrive, regardless of where they live and their background. We're already home, of course, to world-class institutions of higher ed, technical training programs, a thriving business and workforce community. What we really need now is bold thinking, to express our desire to rethink things that have been just because they've always been. And my team, along with CDHE staff, Commissioner Hughes, Commissioner Abramson, have been really thoughtful and intentional to ensure all of you, the people that can make this happen, whether you're on the task force or the work groups, that it will really be in your hands to plot this bold path forward. And as governor, we have your back. Just a few facts about the work ahead and the need for the work of this group. Only 56% of Coloradans pursue post-secondary education. And about 50 to 55% of people completing post-secondary education end up working in this state. Last year, because of COVID, school districts have lost sight of nearly 20,000+ students who are unaccounted for. And this potentially lost cohort not only impacts their own lifetime learning potential, but the communities in which they live. You know, beyond formal higher education, in the last 5 years, only 26% of individuals who participated in training programs through WIOA, so Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, currently work in fields related to their training. That means 74% of them wasted their time and WIOA's money because they're not even working in anything connected with what they did. These statistics show us that the old way of doing things isn't working well enough for Colorado students or our workers or our private sector companies. We really need to reimagine our approach to higher ed and workforce development to foster an environment where our homegrown talent can thrive right here in Colorado, because all Coloradans should have access to programs and training and skills so they can be hired into careers that they're passionate for and that have meaningful opportunities for professional growth and security for themselves and their family. Similarly, Colorado industries and employers should be able to hire from a wealth of homegrown talent. You know, as this task force dives into this important work, I urge you to think big and think boldly. This is a unique opportunity to create transformational and generational change in our education to workforce pathways. It's both a need for our economic vitality as a state, as well as the obligation that we have to every Coloradan to make sure that all of our systems work together as a modern pathway to success rather than an outdated bridge to nowhere. Or even worse, an outdated bridge to debt. To date, our colleges and universities have received $1 billion in stimulus funds. It's unprecedented. We need to incent and encourage the institutions, employers, and training programs to work collaboratively to leverage these one-time funds, to tailor solutions to each region's distinct needs and assets and opportunities, Sustainable system-altering investment in education and workforce development is an enormous opportunity. We should really look at opportunities to bring down additional investments from federal and local sources, higher education, leveraging investment with the business community, the private sector for change. With the expertise in this group, we have a chance to truly re-envision how Colorado serves our students. As we move forward, I urge you to ensure your recommendations fit four key priorities. One, have a multiplying effect. As we just talked about, your proposals as it relates to stimulus money, where there are one-time funds that can match to transform private sector, local funds, philanthropic funds, any other fund sources that ensure ongoing sustainability and cross-sector buy-in. Two, expand educational pathways to in-demand, high-skill, high-wage careers. Think about how we can expand on proven models we know work for educational workforce development alignment, capacity building, innovative financing models, and even regional innovation hubs. Three, encourage local talent ecosystem development. We're a diverse state, and we need to be responsive to local needs. And your proposal should focus on building regional talent strategies to meet those local workforce needs by encouraging cross-sector collaboration and partnerships. And four, ensure all Coloradans, regardless of their background, can access opportunity, focusing on investments, ensure equitable opportunity if we want to fulfill our commitment, as we do, to the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion in both higher ed and the workforce. And as you complete these four priorities, I encourage you to approach all your work with perhaps the following overarching commitments. Be student and worker focused. Put yourselves in the shoes of perhaps your own kids and grandkids, nieces and nephews, people you know in the community. Always envision it from the customer perspective and how it works. Don't be at all encumbered by the status quo of existing structure, traditions, and practices. If you come back and say, get rid of CU and CSU, and here's why, we'll get rid of them. Whatever you need, just because we have something doesn't mean that we should continue to have it in the future. Be bold and look beyond tomorrow. We have challenges to overcome this month and year, and we will overcome them. It's what Coloradans have done for generations, and this work is no different. It's about much more than tomorrow or next month. It's about planning for the next decade, 50 years, century, in a changing world. Recognize and seize the moment. The convergence of COVID and its many disruptions, combined with tight state budgets and the once-in-a-generation infusion of federal stimulus money that can really catalyze change, puts you in the driver's seat for the challenge and opportunity of a lifetime. And that's why we are trusting you for these efforts. The talent gathered in this group, infused with our Western pragmatism, our history of being innovative and tackling tough questions with confidence. I have great faith in all of you and the potential of your wisdom. Be bold, embrace the unknown, and let's continue to make Colorado an innovator and make sure that we are the best state in the country for all learners, the best state in the country for workforce, and the best state in the country for opportunity and equity. Thank you for your dedication to students, to our state. We're going to feel the impact of this participation for generations to come. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Governor. And I'm just looking around this room, scrolling through it, and it is such an honor to have so many people, from our elected officials to institutional representatives, private sector, and the philanthropic community. Really appreciate all of you responding to the call to service on this committee. As I said, we're hoping to avoid the logistics and process conversations and really use this time we've got with the governor to address any questions you all have about the vision for this work and what the opportunity is that sits before us. If you're using the Zoom app, I'd ask you to use down in the reactions. There's a raise your hand icon you can use. We've got 80 plus people on here, so it's tough for me to see if you just lean into your screen. But if you use the chat or raise your hand, and if you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand virtually. But welcome any questions for the governor about his vision for this work and the opportunity he sees that we have before us. I see Daniel with a hand up. Daniel, you get the fastest reaction to your first on. What would you like to talk with the governor about?
Yeah, of course. It's great to meet you again, Governor Polis. So we have our student leaders meeting in which you attended last year, where we kind of bring together all the student leaders in Colorado. I guess my question would be, knowing that myself and I believe it's Jay Sharrow from Colorado Mesa University are one of the few students on this task force. I just want to make sure that we consult with the student leaders as much as we can. Again, like you said, making sure that we do bring in this customer perspective into these discussions. How do you, I guess, what would be your approach to consulting with the 30, 35 student leaders on these discussions and making sure that they do feel included in this process?
Yeah, we hope particularly, we have two students, did you say, Daniel, in this group here, that you can be a conduit for a lot of those ideas. So, and not just limited to at your institution. I mean, high school students too. Maybe you have people you remember from high school and brothers and sisters and their friends, because I mean, it's about both. And then people that are recently out of community college or college. So please be that conduit. And do a lot of listening to get the ideas of folks. We've had good or bad experiences, right? It could be somebody who, went into debt on something and got a degree that they feel is worthless and not helping them get a job in that field. And we need to prevent that kind of waste of resources and misalignment. So please help be that conduit. And of course, make sure those voices are also informing the other members of the task force as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Daniel, for the question. And for those who didn't see it in the chat, we're actively looking for a number of additional pathways. As these working groups all get stood up, some of the first questions will be, what do you need to hear and what do you need to learn to be able to do the work of your working group and this task force well? So where there's a need and an opportunity to hear from more students, we're going to make sure that happens. I see a question from somebody calling in on the phone ending 3346. If you would like to unmute yourself, *6, unmute yourself. And ask your question of the governor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Berrick. It's Joe Rice with Lockheed Martin. Governor, thanks for your comments and for your guidance, and really appreciate being in this group with this great, diverse people from all different perspectives. I think I understand your perspective to focus on things that the state can do and to be innovative in what we're looking at. Would you also be open to if this group were to come up with federal policy recommendations, so things that we could recommend to the federal government that would require federal action? So I understand focusing on state actions, but would you be open to federal recommendations as well, or would you like us to stay away from that?
I would say it's a distinct secondary focus. To the extent it interferes with state level reforms, don't do it. But if you have some that come up along the way that you can agree on, it's okay. Within the realm of federal action, it would be better to focus on potential waivers or regulatory changes that we can request through the Department of Education. In terms of a federal legislative agenda, that would just be pretty far down. I mean, again, if there's something you really come up with that's frustrating, by all means, jot it down. But we don't want that to detract from state level reforms. And then secondly, if there's things we can do at the administrative and executive level with the federal government, we do want to do those if it's like waiver requests from the Department of Education.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Colonel. And I know later we're going to be hearing from Representative McCluskie, who will undoubtedly offer her thoughts on what would be most useful to the legislature. Let me give one
more thing to what Joe Rice was saying. There are higher ed provisions of the reconciliation bill that are happening now. If there are ideas that are coming quickly in the next month or two about particulars of some of those higher education policies, that's something that we could potentially advocate with our two senators for. But I want to make sure we don't get bogged down on the federal side. We definitely need to focus on the state.
Thank you, Governor. And I'm not seeing many hands, and I know with this group, there's undoubtedly a lot of thoughts stirring in your mind. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, and I'll try to call those out.
I'll just add two things that I've always found frustrating. One is we know we're leaving money on the table with our FAFSA completion rate and folks that are especially first generation college goers. If we're ever going to bridge that gap, we've got to make sure that every student maximizes federal aid that is on the table. And so that's one key thing we need to do. A second key thing is there are amazingly rich dual and concurrent enrollment programs, AP, vocational, but they don't touch every kid in high school. There's many kids that will go through high school to their later regret, ignorant of those kinds of opportunities. We would love for really every high schooler to encounter either vocational, dual and concurrent enrollment, AP, some track that has a post-secondary relevancy for that student to at least get exposed to that at the high school level rather than leave it up to kind of whether it's now hit or miss. So those are just two concepts I wanted to bring, both of which are on that kind of high school to post-secondary connection piece.
Thank you, Governor. I'm always skeptical when somebody tells me the governor doesn't have a thought or an idea of what we should be considering here. So appreciate you jumping in there. I'm going to go with Melinda, and then we'll go to Noel and then Josh. Melinda, what would you like to ask?
Hi, I'm curious if you could explain a little more. You sort of mentioned if they get a degree that's kind of useless and they can't do anything with it. What you're picturing when you say that, so I can just get a better understanding.
I mean, students that, you know, friends of Daniel's and our other student that feel they fundamentally got a bad deal and ripped off from higher ed, where, you know, they're back working in retail after being $80,000 in debt, and they could have been earning $15 an hour without going $80,000 in debt. So it needs to be an investment that is accretive for the time and the money. It's not just the money, it's the time too.
Right.
That folks should be able to benefit from degrees and meet the needs of the workforce.
So are there specific degrees that you're thinking of that don't fit?
Well, I hope you'll tell us. I haven't done the work. You're going to do the work.
Okay.
You can analyze those.
Okay.
It's about making sure that they're meeting the needs of today's and tomorrow's workforce. So that's very much part of the work of this group, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Noel Ginsburg, you've been doing a lot of work at the tip of this question around making sure people are ready for the jobs of the future. What would you like to ask them then, Mr. Chavez? We'll get to you.
Well, I just wanted to tie into what the governor said about that transition from high school to college. What we're seeing now with students that have now graduated through their apprenticeships into work are also taking advantage of college. But that connection of doing it within a skill set or a career path that aligns with what they want to do later in life is really powerful. Equally powerful is the fact that businesses are paying for it for the students, making college more affordable, particularly for those students that may not have the financial wherewithal to do that. The question I'd have, you know, the biggest challenge, the elephant in the room with apprenticeship is helping businesses understand this is actually in their self-interest as well. I've seen that in my own business, Intertech Plastics. But I'm curious, Governor, how can we, you know, engage with businesses in a way where they say this is about building a great business, but it's also about a great Colorado?
I think there's, and you have a lot of, there's a lot of great success stories where as businesses see, oh, wow, not only did we, you know, get an apprentice and that did their work, but this led to a future employee that is excelling in our company. So almost every company we know wants to improve their recruitment because they're having a tough time filling jobs. They need to see this as a solution for a problem that their HR and other folks know that they face. And that is apprenticeships. I should have included when I mentioned earlier, you know, whether it's dual and concurrent enrollment, you know, AP vocational, of course, and apprenticeships, always where you're getting the student getting some experience beyond and connection to the workforce. There's also great examples of what's going on in our state, in addition to in the business level, partnerships with folks like at the Cherry Creek Innovation Center, brand new vocational center, the first of 2 decades of its type in Colorado. Through our governor's innovation grants, we funded RISE grants as an example at Fort Lewis in Southwest Colorado, working across district lines to promote workforce readiness in fast-growing industries like construction, tying in the community colleges. So there's great examples of what's going on. I think the biggest shortcoming in is that they're far from universal, and that most students, unfortunately, don't encounter them and don't come through them. And so how do we make sure that these exciting transformational programs become the default mechanism, including generating the employer excitement around the role apprenticeships can play in helping them companies reach their recruitment goals?
Thanks.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Noel. I know we've got limited time with the governor. I'm going to go to Norbert Chavez and then Josh Scott and then James. And Mr. Chavez.
Hi, Norbert Chavez, CU Board of Regents. I know you were joking a little bit when you said, if you want to get rid of CAU and CSU, we will. But I think part of the
You're also welcome to recommend that we keep University of Colorado and CSU. I mean, we really want you thinking about, don't assume they exist, just assume nothing exists.
Sure.
Would you be
Well,
studying these universities? What would you be doing with the resources? I'm not
Sure.
trying to bias you one way or the other. You're welcome to keep CSU and your job over there as a regent.
My point is that we're looking at the structure, but what we're not looking at is the ongoing funding, and the funding that that the legislature has chosen to give over the last 20 years has been on the decline, and therefore it's been placed on the backs of our students. And so it would be great if we were also able to look at more than one-time funding for higher education rather than shifting that burden.
Well, so let me get into what this group is not, because that's important. We're obviously interested in fiscal reforms, you know, and other things like that. But this group is not a fiscal reform group for state budget, long-term state budget stabilization. It's really more about the policy levers, the structure, reinventing it from the ground up. It doesn't mean that there's not separate conversations on funding and funding structures and state revenues and all those things, but that could tie this group into knots. What you're taking on is difficult enough. What we're asking you to take on, right? You know, it's the reform piece, it's the policy piece. I mean, it's the structure piece, it's the opportunity piece. Like, I think that's a big thing to bite off for sure.
Well, and I was back in 2002, probably the last legislator to pass a structural change to higher education, which was eliminating the state college system, and that was a heavy lift that took many years. So. I mean, it is a big issue, but they're related. So I wanted to point that out and make sure that we not forget that piece. Thank you, Governor.
And thank you for that reminder. And as Governor said, we have a kind of a narrow piece here, but certainly as ideas are surfaced, even if they're outside of this scope, we'll be sure to flag those and pass them on. And I know a number of our representatives and senators from both sides of the aisle will be part of this. I want to make sure I get some of the other folks. We're going to go to Josh and then James and then Senator Lundeen and Rebecca Holmes. I'll get to you. Josh, what was on your mind?
Governor, I'd love your perspective for the benefit of the committee and the work groups on the balance of attention between traditional students, who we've talked about or alluded to a little bit in this conversation, and non-traditional students, the folks who need reskilling or upskilling to advance their careers successfully in Colorado.
Yeah, and that's really important. So, I mean, my own professional and personal expertise is more with the student piece, and that's why the two pieces that I brought to it around FAFSA, that's just dumb. We're leaving money on the table, and getting the exposure at the high school level to the post-secondary options of one kind or sort. Those are critical. But we're also dealing with, you know, 32-year-olds that have been in the minimum wage economy. How do they get the opportunity to get a professional career? 54-year-olds who've had a good job, but because of changes in the global economy, the job is gone, it's changed. They don't want to work at $15 retail. They're not eligible for retirement yet. What skill can they get where they can earn a professional career and work another 15 years and then retire with dignity? So those kinds of case studies and use studies are going to be important in your minds. It's not just the kind of, you know, high school transition. It's also the different case studies of different workers. Sometimes it helps to put what we do in the, you know, private sector and business. We have different like profiles of customers. So, I mean, you can like draw it up, like here's a 54-year-old, he worked in coal, he's been earning, you know, good salary. He's not going to retire. What is his transition? Here's a, you know, 29-year-old who's been working at $15 an hour for 9 years, but she has 2 kids. She wants to have a better life. She can't be a full student full-time, of course. She has to work. What is that path where she can then get a professional career to provide for her family? So those kinds of things, and really look at you know, bringing in real people and real examples to see if you can meet their needs.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Governor. James, I'm going to go to you and then Senator Lundeen, followed by Rebecca, and Helen will get to you in just a second. James, what was your question?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. This is maybe better known as Jim Wilson. I was on my cell phone because I could not get through on my computer. I'm not that IT proficient, but now I'm there. So thank you, Governor, for taking the time to visit with everyone, and thanks to everyone for being here. We've got a good group of people. My question, Governor, is color me skeptical maybe from 8 years in the legislature, but we'd come up with good ideas and we'd find out that the wheels of progress would move like molasses on a slow morning. So do we really have the authority to make decisions or just recommendations? If we put in this work, we're doing it on a short timetable, we come up with great ideas. Where does the authority come from to actually implement these? Do we have authority, or what's the process?
So both, meaning I would expect that out of what comes out of this, some will be things that you yourselves as commissioners have the authority to implement. Others, Jim, might require statutory changes and would be part of a legislative agenda that would go back. There could also be some that ask for policy changes at the State Board of Education would be an example, or other state bodies. But I fully expect that part of what you're coming up with will be within the authority of your commission, but you're not limiting yourselves to that. I mean, absolutely, if there's items that need statutory changes, we'll figure out how we can do that and get it done. But I do believe, Jim, that a lot of what you come up with, the commission itself has quite a bit of authority under statute, and you will absolutely be able to maximize the use of that to implement some of these recommendations. But I do expect they'll go above and beyond that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lundeen, get you in there after your colleague, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Rep. Wilson. Nice that you were able to cut through the technological veil and join us in person. Governor, I really appreciate your framing to perceive as if it's all blue ocean. What could we do if we in fact saw it to be the best thing to do? So that's a fairly philosophical box that you've given us the ability to operate within. And so I'm going to ask you a philosophical question, a question about your perspective on who owns the educational outcome. Is it a private good or is it a state good, societal good? Who has the agency in this? Because I think that in many ways can inform how we choose to create that which we might be able to create in the blue ocean.
I think, Paul, almost everybody would agree it's both. I mean, first and foremost, the effect is on somebody's life and their opportunity and their responsibility. But we as a state and custodians of the state also have an interest in a thriving economy as a state. And so we also have to make sure that we are meeting today's and tomorrow's workforce needs in collaboration with the business sector. So it's both. I mean, at the individual level, it drives it. But there is a state responsibility to have a prosperous state that we all benefit from. And so how do we tie it into gaps that we know we have in a meaningful way, honoring, of course, the role of individual decision makers as a whole?
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lundeen. And I'm going to get in trouble if...
Wait, Paul, can you answer that from your perspective as well? Do you agree with that, or do you have a different perspective on that?
I do generally agree. I think you get more motivation the closer you put the agency to the individual. So my bias is toward the individual, but I do agree there is a societal benefit from the work that we undertake.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Gov. I'm going to get in trouble if I keep the Gov much more than another 3 or 4 minutes. I appreciate him staying past time. Rebecca, what's on your mind for the Gov?
I'll be quick. Governor, I know the folks on this call who I know share your excitement about building a system for the next generation for 50 to 100 years into the future, as you mentioned. At the same time, it's hard not to be distracted by a really significant rise in our youth unemployment rate, the 20,000 unenrolled students that you mentioned, folks who've stopped out of community college. What would you want us to know about dual efforts at the state level right now that are a little more urgent in response to those 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in school and not working?
Yeah, I mean, I think this group should focus more on the systemic and transformational change. I think in terms of what's happening short term because of the pandemic at one time, obviously we want to find routes for students that are out of it now. I don't expect that there'll be the lower levels of workforce participation that we might have now, in another year, another 2 years. I think it's a short-term phenomenon. So, I mean, again, if there's a few things that kind of, as we said, kind of if you have federal ideas, just maybe write them down and put them aside. If there's something that is immediate, over the next few months, that you can sort of put it aside, but it's not, the core of this is structural, transformational for a changing future that is fundamentally different than how we do it, using this moment of change and the short-term crisis around certain students as that catalyst, that system that really will help prepare everybody for success.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Rebecca. And I know that's, honestly, the start of some of the weeds that we're going to spend a lot of the next few months getting into. I have to apologize to Helen and a few other people who had their hands up, because I've already kept the governor past when he was scheduled to be with us, and I know he's got another meeting to get into.
Let's do Helen's real quickly. Go ahead, Helen. Last one.
Okay.
Thanks, Governor. Thanks, Governor.
My next call is a COVID update, and it's all bad news, and I need something to keep me upbeat here. So I'm going to stick with you guys for another call. Go ahead, Helen.
I definitely get overridden by the governor. Helen, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate how you are encouraging us not to be encumbered by status quo and to think towards proven programs. I just have a question for you. I appreciate your focus on being student and worker focused as the customer. I guess this is almost a comment as much as a question. How will we also ensure that we are hearing the voice of the customer, i.e. the business community, so that we can really figure out how we can meet the 21st century skills, not just soft skills, but metacognitive and other skills that our employers want and need?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It also goes to, Paul's point about the kind of individual need, and the two align very well, because one of, not the only, but one of the main things that students want is employability and a good salary, right? Doesn't mean that's all they want, and that's legitimate, but that is one of their top concerns. That is a concern the business sector wants: qualified, skilled people to fill good positions. And so bringing those together happens at the institution level, happens at the state level, happens at the collaborative level, where I would argue it doesn't happen enough, right? I mean, I have no doubt that many of our institutions do this on their own, but have to do this more as a regional collective or between different institutions, breaking down silos. But absolutely, both of those are critical, and they are largely consistent. That doesn't mean they're 100% consistent, but they are enormous overlap, largely consistent. Thank you all. You have a lot of work ahead. Look forward to hearing your recommendations.
Thank you so much for joining us, Governor. Thank you, Helen, for the question. I know the governor has to hop to go do that COVID briefing. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We spent a little bit of time getting way into the weeds, and now we're going to try to pull back up and really talk about what is the intent of this? What are we trying to accomplish? And really, what was the spark behind all of this? We'll have a lot of time in the next few weeks as we dig into a fast and furious pace, but hopefully a really in-depth. We have the task force and all these working group meetings happening in sync. But to kind of pull us back up and give us a sense of what sparked all of this, it's my pleasure to introduce Bill's sponsor, Representative Julie McCluskie.
Thank you, Commissioner Abramson. I am so very grateful for this moment just to say thank you to this broad group that has come together under such an incredible and exciting challenge. Thank you, Dr. Paccione, for your words. Certainly grateful to Governor Polis for his leadership and inspiration. And I want to talk a little bit about the genesis of House Bill 1330 and talk about the hopes that came together in this bill. Thank my co-sponsors, Representative Ricks, Senators Zenzinger, and Senators Kirkmeyer. You know, the pandemic presented the entire educational system in this state and nation with a variety of daunting challenges and complications. And I want to commend our institutions, our universities, our colleges, and all of our public schools for how they have really dug deep to respond in thoughtful and powerful ways to keep students on track to being ready for college and career. And then once in college, really helping students prepare for what is becoming the promise of a new normal, a different world, and being ready to take on jobs, particularly in the light of this pandemic and economic downturn. The governor had worked with the legislature in a statewide listening tour back in February and March to identify the priorities that every corner of this state, every community was facing, the needs, the fears, the hopes, and out of that came three significant priorities. the need for work on affordable housing, the need for work on the behavioral and mental health system and services in this state, and workforce development, workforce revitalization. And I think you can't talk about workforce in our economy without also including higher education, even our K-12 system. And it was from that we started talking about the pressures that our institutions are under. Thank you, Daniel, for reminding us that everything we do and everything we hope for through 1330 needs to be student-centered, that our lens should always start with and end with the student. How are we helping a student achieve their Colorado dream by getting into the college, the university of their choice, or pursuing the upskilling, reskilling, next skilling that they need with an industry partner, with a regional workforce center? How do we make all those things happen? And I really do believe that it's time to look at the system. We're doing that through 1330 in three very powerful ways. Student success initiatives. How are we thinking about student success? What's already out there working? Kudos to our higher ed leaders that have developed a number of strategies to keep students on track and help them succeed during this moment. What about workforce revitalization? How do we engage better with industry and business partners? How do we rethink the integration of higher education and workforce development? And then finally, and what will come later for this task force, is that consideration of the work of the higher education system in its entirety. Are we aligned in the way we should be? Is it time to take a step back and talk about role and mission and service areas? Are those the right approaches for our system in achieving our goals? With a final thought, I want to say that I have heard from so many people, the challenge before us in this work is overwhelming. And is it really achievable in the 3 to 4 months that we have before we have to deliver some recommendations to the General Assembly? And what I would say is that, COVID brought incredible pressures on our education system. The response was so impressive. The flexibility, the nimbleness that our institutions demonstrated is a powerful example to all of us that yes, change can happen in a quick moment, in time when we need it to. And while this is very hard work, and I'm so grateful to the task force and the subcommittee members who are diving into this, while it is certainly a lot of hard work, I have every confidence that we will seize this opportunity, that we will make good and purposeful use of the dollars that have been granted to us to use during this time. And I'm excited to see what all these bright and brilliant minds on this call today and those engaged in the future are able to come up with. So again, my thanks to Commissioner Abramson and certainly to Vice Chair Hughes for leading this very challenging work. Thanks to all the task force members and subgroup members who are willing to jump in. And I'm excited to learn and listen and be a part of the next step. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative McCluskie. I'm just looking around to see if Joe Barella is still with us. You've had an opportunity, obviously, to hear from the legislative side. You've heard from higher ed. You've heard from the governor. There he is. I see Joe on. We thought it was equally important. This is not just an issue of higher education. It's an issue of education and the workforce. So it's my pleasure to introduce Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, Joe Barella, for a few remarks.
Thank you all, and thank you for your participation on this important work. Just want to reiterate how important the words the governor spoke about, that we have an opportunity to be really bold in Colorado and really be responsive to, I prefer to say, learners and workers. And so we need to really focus on how our education inputs can be corrected to the world of work. And career-connected education is something that people need to realize, that the days of one and done as far as an education that will lead to a lifetime of work have disappeared. And so how can we make sure that our their education inputs are systemically structured to help someone's work life cycle. So as the governor mentioned, someone who is 18, someone who is 25, someone who is 34, and someone who's maybe 55 that needs some type of reskilling, upskilling, or next skilling that makes them relevant and important and can work if they need to and want to well into their maturity. So want to make sure that you realize that it's so important that, you know, today with the Department of Labor, we have about 130,000 open jobs, unfilled jobs in Colorado right now. And yes, some of that is due to the pandemic, but a lot of it is because we don't have the right skills that employers are looking for in our workforce. And so we make sure, as Dr. Paccione mentioned, that there's access for learners at every stage of their life cycle, their work life cycle, and that most importantly, work needs to be combined with professional experiences. We need to get out of the idea that academic learning can only happen in physical structures and it's built on a bureaucracy that is tied to an associate's degree and 4-year degrees where students have to stop working and go to school. And we really need to look at how can we extend that to people who choose to learn, gain competence and skills through professional experiences. And so how can we get to a place where we have an opportunity for learning to happen in academic settings, but also learning is happening and credentials and relevant to our business and industries when it's learned at a professional setting, on the job, through apprenticeships, through internships. And so the work you're doing is so critical to how not only young people, but mid-career professionals and even mature workers can stay relevant and meet the needs of our businesses moving forward. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate the work that we will all do collectively over the next few months.
Thank you, Director Barella. Thank you, Rep. McCluskie, Director Paccione. It is such an impressive group that we have gathered here. And I know I'm scrolling through and seeing so many reps and senators from both sides of the aisle who are really committed to hearing and learning from this group how they can take your thinking and move it forward as it's just been laid out. We're happy to open this back up to everybody for questions if you have them for Director Paccione, for Rep. McCluskie, for Director Barella. I think he's got another meeting to get to. As I said, coming up on the 2nd, we'll have an orientation where we'll really dig into a lot of the logistics, the mechanics of what we'll be asking, and a lot of the work that we'll be diving into. But while we've got this group who is setting a vision for us and making asks of all of you, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask them questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. Use the reaction icon to raise your hand. If you can't find that, wave your hand, and I'll be doing my best to scroll through and find you, although we do have 80 plus here. But feel free to raise your hand. If you're on the phone, it's *9. Melinda, I see you have another question. Please jump in.
I just have a brainstorm. It's something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And that is, you know, my experience is working with a lot of pre-collegiate and definitely working more at the higher education than the K-12, although I've done some work in K-12. And without question, for me, it's a combination of work experience and sort of the more traditional learning that is what just lights up students. And I've always advocated for co-op, getting students out into the workforce at the same time that they're doing that. And that's in every discipline, in every sort of education, that there should be this mix of workforce. And so I just want to throw out there that as a basis for all of it, everything that they were talking about and that blue water that I was hearing about, that, I mean, if Colorado could be the place where all education, where rather than just being a school was a co-op school, but everyone who is educated in Colorado, education was work experience and sort of the more traditional learning, that everyone that took classes everywhere in Colorado had some sort of project learning with their traditional learning. To me, that would be amazing. I mean, we could be a leader in the country for something, you know, doing something like that. There's bits and pieces of that around the country, but you know, to me, that's a blue sky sort of thing. It'd be amazing to figure out how to coordinate all that, but I would love to see it happen in everything from English to, you know, to engineering where I am. But that's what we need.
Thank you, Melinda, for the comment and the thought. Anybody else have questions? And I'll tell you, I am not afraid to be that one person who says I'm giving you time back in the day rather than taking more of it. But Sarah and I and the team want to make sure we stick around to answer any questions. Jen Walmer, I see a question on your mind, please.
Yes, I participated in the first orientation and see calendar invites now for the first work group meetings. But I know when we did the orientation, one of the things we discussed is that a lot of the work of the task force members was pre-work and an ability to come to those work group meetings prepared to share. And I'm just wondering when, as task force members, we should be expecting materials for the meetings that are coming up in the next week or so, just so we can plan the pre-work time to be able to do the studying we need to come fully prepared.
I appreciate that. And I'm not going to say that Jen just became my favorite student, but Jen just became my favorite student for the moment. You will hear Sarah and I. Sarah describes it as the flipped classroom. We really are going to try to use as much time as possible when we're together to really be talking and digging into the issues and workshopping them, which is going to mean we're going to send the textbook reading home to be done ahead of that. Sarah and I are working right now with our facilitators, Brian, who's on the call right now, to finalize an agenda for the first work group meeting, which will be September 8th. And I expect that, he's actually waiting for Sarah and I think, to sign off on that. So as soon as we get that, our goal is going to always be to get things out at least a week in advance of meetings. So we haven't sent it yet, but we are diligently working. I'll tell you, it was a bit of a scramble as we chased so many people to get them to join. Sarah, did you want to jump in and add anything?
I do, and unless I'm wrong, but I believe that everyone, and for those of you who are on a working group, but not on a task force, not on the umbrella task force, the task force members did have their orientation. Work group members, yours is coming up, so don't panic, you didn't miss anything. Number two, to Jen's question, which is a great question, it is my understanding and belief that all of the people on this call, in their letter that they received from, probably it came directly from Ben Boggs, it was the letters from Berrick and I, should have contained a link to what we've been calling shorthand a leveling up document. And Jen, that leveling up document is a PowerPoint deck that basically provides essential questions and support materials and resources for each of the 7 original legislative scope questions. It's a pretty dense document. There's a lot in there. When we get to your first workforce meeting, we'll talk about, of those 7 questions, which specific areas each work group will focus on, but we wanted to make sure that all of you had as much information as you could possibly digest, and there's a lot there. So that should be in the link that you received from Ben, I believe last week. And if you didn't, what we'll do anyway, Brian, why don't we commit today to send that out again so that it's at the top of your inbox. So we'll get that out today. Chloe, Brian, we can hopefully commit to that. And then 2, Berrick referenced this, but we'll also be sending all work group members a link to a survey that allows you to do 2 things. 1, share a brief bio, so a 3 to 5 sentence bio, not a 3 to 5 page bio. That will help all of us on this call get to know one another and not have to go through an hour-long presentation of intros at the first meeting, but we can jump right into the work. And number 2, it leaves space in the survey to ask any other specific questions that would be important for us to address before we start the work. And we can then come prepared to those first work group meetings, hopefully having answered some of the nuts and bolts that you might have be wondering about. So hopefully that catches everyone up to speed on what information has already been shared.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I see somebody raising their hand, and sir, unfortunately, you're only listed as admin, so I will just call on you and ask you to share your name with everybody.
Thank you. So this is Steve Jordan, and I know the governor said in response to a question that this task force was not created for the purpose of trying to rethink the overall funding formulas for higher education. But the question I have is that many of the ideas that we might come up with, including, I know Noel has spent a lot of time around the apprenticeship issue, might actually require funding in order to really see them implemented in the way they ought to be implemented, that really give them a chance. So is that going to be an open issue to make recommendations around specific policy initiatives that we believe might require stimulus money in order to achieve the purpose that we're trying to lay out?
So Dr. Jordan, this is Sarah Hughes. I don't want to put words in the governor's team's mouth, but I think, or the legislators' mouths, but I think the answer to that question is, if there are policy initiatives that we want to explore, especially that can be funded by the one-time stimulus dollars, that those are absolutely within the realm of what we should be talking about and exploring. If the question is this group going to digest and analyze in great depth the existing funding allocation formula, which is actually relatively new, that the CFOs, department, and commission all worked on collaboratively over the last 2 years to set up for this next 5-year cycle, I think the answer to that is no. However, if in achieving some of the policy initiatives or recommendations we might all contemplate together, require us to re-examine that, we can flag that needs to be looked at. But I think the governor was trying to say we ourselves were not going to tackle the existing funding allocation formula, but we are very much open to exploring how we as a state can best use that $95+ million of one-time stimulus dollars. Dr. Jordan, does that address the question?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I was really trying to get at that question of, can we think about these initiatives in the terms of in order for an initiative to succeed, we believe it needs to be stimulated with this amount of or type of funding. And not, I understand we're not supposed to get into the general funding formula.
Great. Any other questions on not just on not really the mechanics or the process, which, as Sarah said, we'll get more information back out to everybody, but on the vision and the intent. Well, I can't give you much, but I can give you this 5 minutes back, because I will probably take more than 5 minutes from you in the future as we dig into this work. Again, Commissioner Hughes and I truly are grateful for the time that you all have committed and the willingness to serve on this task force and these working groups. I know I speak for Dr. Paccione, Director Barella, and the governor when I extend my sincere thanks to all of you. We look forward to inundating you with things to learn, things to know, and more importantly, to picking all of your brains and working together the next few months to develop a set of recommendations that can really move the dial in some bold ways, as the governor called on us to do. So thank you all for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you in the coming weeks and months as we dive into this. Appreciate all your time. Have a great afternoon.